Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's event. I'm going to give everyone just about a minute to join as folks roll in. Really looking forward to today. The topic of today's conversation is acing your startup's migration to AWS. And while we wait for everyone to be able to roll in, I'll just point out some things about the GoToWebinar interface that would be really useful for you as we go through today's presentation. First thing is you will notice that there is a section for chat. Feel free to chime in there. We will do our best to monitor it and respond to anything that is there. If you're having trouble hearing us or seeing anything on the slide deck, just let us know and we'll do our best to respond in the chat. In addition, you will notice there is a section called questions. This is obviously a great place for you to put your questions. If you do end up putting questions in the chat, we'll monitor that as well. But if you can remember, it would be amazing if you put the questions in the questions box because that helps us prioritize them. And with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. So again, the topic of today's presentation is acing your startup's migration to AWS. And I think it would be appropriate for us real quickly to talk about who we all are, including our businesses and all of your presenters for the day. So we'll start with me. That's a lovely picture of me about 20 pounds ago, pre-pandemic. And my name is Jonathan LaCour. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Mission. We'll introduce Mission a little bit more in a moment after we get through these introductions. But a little bit about me. I am a technologist, obviously, and I have been a kind of builder, consumer, and user of the cloud for many years, since very early days of public cloud. I'm also a programmer. I write code more than I should at this stage of my career, and I'm a cloud strategist as well, and a big bourbon junkie. So for those of you who like whiskey as well, look forward to the world opening back up so we can all get together and have one together. So that's a little about me. I'm also joined by some colleagues and friends, so I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
It's so hard to go after bourbon junkie, but my name's Scott Goldberg. I am the solutions architect manager here at Mission. I'm a cloud architect, and I think by extension, a big automator. So that goes for work and in my personal life. Love helping customers sort of get rid of those mundane tasks and make them certainly like repeatable and more easily deployable, whether that goes for infrastructure or application code, things like that. I guess in my personal life, I'm a big smart home and 3D printing enthusiast. So I've got smart everywhere, kind of goes to the whole automation piece of things. But if anybody needs any tips on either of those things, feel free to look me up.
Yeah, we need to 3D print the proper title on your slide there, Scott.
So it does appear that way, yeah.
Scott was recently promoted to be the manager of our solution architect, so make sure you congratulate him on that in the chat. Rushabh,
and good afternoon, everyone. Rushabh Shah. I am a senior partner success manager here at Amazon. Just a little bit about me: a big cloud advocate. Been really focused in on the startups, and I currently support over 500 early stage startups across USA. And I've been lucky enough to have lived in several different countries and 8 different cities. So, maybe if we get a chance, I could tell you some of my favorite places I've lived and some of my favorite cuisines. I've had over 6 years experience collaborating with partners such as Mission, and really the goal is to drive beneficial outcomes for our AWS customers. Great. Look forward to today's session.
Great, thank you, Rushabh. And I think you are lucky to have lived in several countries and 8 different cities. That's pretty amazing. Good background. Okay, well, with that, let's talk a little about who Mission is. I think we all know who AWS is, but in case you aren't aware of Mission, we are an AWS Premier Partner, and that is the highest designation that you can receive from AWS, and that means that we have been kind of vetted by AWS based upon our customer success. So our case studies and their actual reporting back to AWS of our skill sets. So we offer a very comprehensive set of services kind of across the entire spectrum of wherever you are in your cloud journey. Obviously, today we're talking about migrations, and so these first 2 boxes are really highly relevant to today's conversation. So whether at the beginning of your journey, if you need a kind of a readiness assessment to determine your kind of readiness to migrate, or you need to do some POCs or road mapping and figure out how to get there, and then the migration itself, we can actually help you execute. We can actually do transformation during the process, implement CI/CD and infrastructure as code to enable you to be successful there. And then once you are in the cloud, we provide a whole series of services that help you manage and be successful in the environment, including AWS account management, 24/7 monitoring and support using kind of enterprise level observability platforms. We offer some security services as well, and continuous DevOps consultation, which I find to be an extremely valuable thing for our customers, and they seem to love it too. Finally, we help you optimize as well, so we can keep you on pace and understanding kind of your, your governance and kind of your spend, making sure you keep that under control, help you do attribution of your costs, and help you access discounts as well with AWS. So as I mentioned, we're a premier consulting partner, which is the highest designation. But we also have other things that we have been vetted and validated and verified with. Those are called competencies and designations. So from a competencies perspective, we have the migration competency, which means that we have done many migrations and at a variety of different scales, including very large and kind of very medium. And we also have the DevOps, Microsoft workloads, SaaS, healthcare and life sciences competencies. We are designated as a managed service provider, which is an extremely challenging thing to be able to achieve with AWS, and a bunch of other things as well. So we are your one-stop shop partner for AWS, and we are 100% focused on the Amazon cloud. So before we dive into the actual migrations themselves, let's go ahead and do a poll real quick to kind of assess where the audience is in their journey. So for those of you who are not familiar, this is an anonymous poll platform here in GoToWebinar. So you don't have to worry about anyone seeing what you have to say. We're going to have an aggregate of results after everyone responds. So please do me a favor and go ahead and select one of those phases that you are in your journey. All right. I see some answers rolling in. This is one of the major benefits of being the presenter is I get to see the results early. So let's wait a little bit longer. Okay. All right, I think we can go ahead and show the results. And I am very pleased about this. 100% of respondents are in the planning phase. Well, I got to tell you what, you are in the right place today. So let's talk a little bit about why you might migrate to AWS. So obviously there are a huge number of reasons, and we can't touch on all of them today, but I really wanted to kind of hone in on 4 things. And I'm going to start with this kind of left-hand column, agility and development or deployment. And this is what I think a lot of people really think of when they think of being in the public cloud, right? You've got dozens of services with hundreds of thousands of features and a lot of capabilities that you can't access anywhere else, right? And the kind of agility of the public cloud is one of the main reasons people want to get there. But it also accelerates your development and your deployment, resiliency, ability to handle disaster recovery and failure a lot better than you would be able to elsewhere. So I think this left-hand column is something that most technologists understand is of value. But I also think this right-hand column is a really interesting thing to consider. So from a cost perspective, many people have the impression that you might spend more on the public cloud than you would on-prem. And it turns out that a public cloud like AWS, especially AWS, gives you so many levers that you can push and pull to kind of drive your optimization and your cost efficiency. So if you are taking advantage of the native services inside of AWS, if you're doing things like adopting the managed services like RDS, for example, you can cut your operational cost. You can take advantage of all sorts of kind of pricing mechanisms like reserved instances and compute savings plans, and you can actually get significant cost efficiency, and you can get far greater insight into your spend by kind of project, cost center, team, whatever you want to do while you're in the cloud. And that's something that we do for our customers all the time. So cost efficiency is actually quite a big driver. And longevity. I got to tell you what, I'm pretty sure AWS is going to be around for quite some time. We've had a lot of our startup customers who end up deciding to migrate to AWS because their co-location facility tells them they're shutting down, or their data center has an issue, or they're going into a large hardware refresh cycle, right? And that's another reason that you might want to migrate to AWS. So here on the right, you'll see that there's a great white paper from IDC that shows a lot of other benefits, including kind of a 51% reduction in cost of operations. And now a lot of that has to do with taking advantage of AWS's managed services. Far fewer security incidents. And this also is one that comes as a surprise to many people, but AWS really takes a lot of the burden off of securing the cloud itself and leaves you just to worry about securing your own workload. More productivity, reductions in downtime, and increased agility. So we all know we want to migrate. That's why you're all here today. And with that, I think it'd be a really good opportunity to hand over to Rushabh, and he can talk a little bit about kind of his perspective on migrating to AWS.
Thank you, Jonathan. And good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Rushabh, and I'm a partner success manager here at AWS. And what that really means is that my role is to understand the startups, and based upon where you are in your journey, it's really to help support you by identifying and introducing you to the right partners, such as Mission, who can really help scale and accelerate your product and solution offering out to markets. Next slide, please, Jonathan. Now, for the last 15 years, startups have overwhelmingly preferred to develop on top of AWS, and they do this for a number of reasons. If you look at the vertical and spaces that we're in, it covers every possible sectors, from healthcare and life sciences to fintech. These are companies like 23andMe who are using AWS to create over 150 different reports based on your genetics data, to companies like Convoy who are completely disrupting the $800 billion trucking industry, and is now really a key player in post-COVID world, getting goods from point A to point B. But I think, next slide, please. But why AWS? So, startups really choose AWS for multiple reasons. One, we really truly do understand startups. Like myself, who's solely dedicated to startups and understanding the needs of startups, we have an entire business development team that is comprised of former venture capitalists, startup executives, and startup founders. The whole role of this team is to learn about your company and find ways to introduce you to partnership with Amazon, introduce you to other startups, and even make connections into the larger world of enterprises where you can sell your offerings there. Two, we have a number of proven programs for startups. For example, let's say you're building a physical product and you want to sell to the million of customers on Amazon.com. Launchpad is a program where we have procurement offerings and getting your business up and going from, Launchpad is a program that we have to get your product front page placement on Amazon. With Amazon Business, which helps the procurement offering and getting your business up and going from the office side of it, along with a number of different credit programs. But of course, the cornerstone of why startups have been using Amazon and continue to use Amazon today is really because we have the deepest and broadest technical platform out there. And so the way to think about this is these are all the essential building blocks to really take some of the biggest ideas and build them quickly and easily. So perhaps you want to be ingesting and processing tremendous amount of real-time data. Well, you can do that using Kinesis. Maybe you're in the space of machine learning and you have an ML expert who wants to deploy machine learning environments to build, train, and deploy these models at scale. Well, SageMaker is a tool that lets you do this. Or maybe you're in manufacturing and you want to be leveraging IoT devices, and doing in a secure and encrypted way and managing all these devices in the field. Well, our IoT offering helps in that space. So these are just 3 of the 190 services that, again, let you take an idea, piece these building blocks together, and start tackling some of the large problems. Next slide, please, Jonathan. What was kind of a surprise to us is how AWS really impacted the startup ecosystem over the last 15 years. Some of the data that we have looked at that dates back to 2005, that looks back at 2005, typical amount of money it would cost to get a startup off the ground was about $500,000. And that's a lot of money when you consider that a lot of that was just going towards infrastructures and teams to manage it well. Well, when AWS came out, it allowed people to basically leverage tools like RDS, EC2, and S3, and this reduced the cost down to about $50,000 to get an idea off the ground. We're seeing companies launch for less than $5,000 now, and these are 1 or 2 person startups who have 30 to 40,000 paying customers. So this evolution has just been really extraordinary and incredible to see, but it's also changed the way that VCs really look at startups and the strategies around investing in them. Harvard Business School, next slide, please. Harvard Business School did a study that looked at the first 10 years of impact of AWS, specifically Amazon to startups. And what they found was because VCs no longer had to make these big one-time $500,000 bets, they were able to spread their risk across 10 smaller $50,000 bets. What you ended up seeing was a big increase in the number of early stage startups basically coming about, and this has continued to evolve since then. It's incredible to see this because you have people with an idea, a tiny bit of cash, being able to get that company going and perhaps even bootstrap it for the long amount of time. This was just not possible before AWS was around. Another key value to Amazon is really how our services help drive a lot of innovation within your company. Of course, there's zero upfront cost. We're not paying these long-term contracts, but because you can turn on and off these services as you need them, this means that now your teams are able to launch faster if you have a new idea. In a matter of days, you can spin up a prototype of an idea and get it out to somebody. For example, there was a company in Missouri, and they were focused on educational space. And several months after COVID started to get bigger, they were able to pivot and create a contact tracing app within 3 days using Amazon Connect to build a whole call system that lets you call in, provide information about the contact tracing details, and triage your situation along with the mobile app. The idea that a company is able to pivot within 3 days to to an entirely different new market, again, is just the kind of value of being able to build on AWS. What this means is it ends up driving down the cost of your experimentation. The quicker it is, the quicker it is to take an idea, build a prototype, and put in the hands of your customer. It means that more of these ideas you can be testing, the more experiments you can be running, and when one finally does take off, you can double down on that idea and spin off resources and turn off the ones that aren't quite making the cut. So ultimately, this means is that it allows you to focus on what really matters, and that's building products. You shouldn't be spending your time managing infrastructure, securing system, patching them, worrying about backups and updates. You should be focusing on building and engaging services and offerings really for your customers. Next slide, please. Another interesting trend that we saw in the very early days and the humble beginnings of any company is that your technical needs are pretty simple. People need a website, a domain name, an email address. But your needs as a startup are going to grow. They're going to change as you evolve, as you tap into new markets. If you have new revenue streams, as your user base grows, your need for infrastructure is going to rapidly start increasing and changing. And so these are just some examples of the way that you have to be thinking when your infrastructure starts growing. In the early days, people will just pick any offering that has a static website, any kind of hosting service, and they will think, this will get me through the first hurdle, and it does. But when their company starts to have more complicated use cases, or security becomes important because they're processing potentially financial data, or resiliency or scalability becomes important because you have more users, that's when we see people reaching out to partners like Mission and Amazon, and they say, hey, we need a more scalable, resilient infrastructure. That that is what we want to be doing more with data analytics space, to understand what our users are doing and to figure out what new features we should be building. And so your early choice of where you build is okay, but once you start to reach those pain points, that's when AWS really helps you unlock a lot more potential within your company. Now, a lot of people ask the question, as I'm building this, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? And one thing that Mission's really good at, and one thing that you should be aware of, is a well-architected framework. These are the essential questions you should be asking yourself to make sure you're building proper infrastructure and architecture. They'll build around the 5 pillars of performance, operational resiliency, reliability, security, and most importantly, cost optimization, which should be a key factor when you're building your company and trying to keep your burn rate low. one of the extra benefits of having a really well architected system, and a lot of people don't think about this as you start growing more within your company, is that you're going to be hiring more developers and more engineers who come in and start to make sense of what you've built. Oftentimes in pre-AWS companies, these new hires come in, spend the first few months trying to decipher the weird ways that people have built these systems and hand jam weird solutions. But if you've built your company or you've done your migration using a well-architected framework, it means that one of the many people who are familiar with AWS that you hire who come in and join your team as a developer can quickly get up and running and deploying in a matter of minutes rather than spending weeks trying to read diagrams and learn all these custom toolings. So there's a real value added benefit of using the well-architected framework and getting the guidance by someone like Mission to make sure you're building is the way that people expect that they start looking at the setup. Now, of course, beyond the startup space, we have a large number of enterprise customers also using Amazon, millions of them, and startups say, well, now I'm using AWS. How can I tap into selling perhaps my B2B or SaaS offerings to these enterprises? And that was a big ask that we've had. And so, next slide, please. And so for the last couple of years, we actually have a program called AWS Connection. And what this does, it's a double opt-in program, and we talk to enterprises across hospitality, travel, healthcare, gaming, you name it. And if we find out what problems they're facing, and they're trying to solve where a startup might be offering a solution in that space. We then go through our huge Rolodex of startups who are running it on AWS, and we find a mutual overlap of interest in problem solving. And then when both sides say, yes, there is a purpose here, we facilitate the introduction and have a whole meeting to kind of work out that partnership. Now, in 2019 alone, next slide, please. In 2019 alone, we had over 1,000 meetings. Now, this isn't a one-to-many, or this isn't even 5 startups sitting down in front of one enterprise. This is one startup and one enterprise sitting down and trying to find ways that they can really help each other. And this is just one of the many programs that you get access to once you're building on top of AWS. Of course, in the world of startups, you're building fast and it's all about how quickly can you get out the door. And at the same time, you should be building smart. I'm going to touch back on the idea of cost optimization because I think that's an area where startups really struggle. We're the only provider who have a trusted advisor dashboard. And this is a tool that you have access to, which will tell you where you're overspending and where you can save money. One thing we don't like to see, and Mission doesn't like to see, is that your spend on infrastructure is outpacing the growth of your users. And so Trusted Advisor is a way for you to go back and look at the ways that you can right-size instances, make changes to improve performance, find ways to enhance your availability by having proper failover or active-active situations, improvements to your security, and more. But the interesting pattern is that startups know that they can depend on this. And what we end up seeing, and this is just a hypothetical chart to kind of demonstrate this point. Startups start building in January and they're starting to use these services. They're spinning stuff up and they might forget to turn something down. They over provision stuff from the start because you don't know how many users you might be getting, and then you forget to go back and downsize that instance later on. So 9 months go by and then you say, wait, my Amazon bill is much higher. So you look at this tool and then you start to optimize. And then you go back to what you were doing at that point. We often, from the AWS, talk to startups and say, look at the trusted advisor and then go, I know what I need to do is to reduce my cost. I just don't have the time to be doing it right now. And that's a good time to think about partners like Mission. Mission is a great way to buy that time to have someone come in, spend that time finding the way to help you optimize this infrastructure. So if you talk to somebody and say, hey, have you gone through any kind of optimization on your own for cost saving? People will say it's too low of a priority for me right now, even though it could be a tremendous amount of saving. If you partner with someone like Mission early on, they're going to make sure that your infrastructure is scaling proportionately to your user growth and that a great amount of realized saving is that you're not in the cycle of overspending and trying to reduce costs. Spending, reducing cost, and so a good way to recap is partners really help make sure that you're squeezing every cent of optimization out of your infrastructure. Of course, with startups, you're building fast and you're trying to get quickly to market. You know, getting early to market is okay, but getting there late can be disastrous. You'll be playing catch up against your competitors and other people in the space. Startups are always strapped for time shop for resources and oh, all good, perfect. Um, are always shop for resource. Another great way to think about partners is that this is a shortcut to it. To say, look, I'm going to build my mobile app, I'm going to get my website work done, my design, work on my marketing piece, and I'm going to let Mission help sort out the things that's going to scale, and that's really going to do it at a cheap cost. How is it performing and reliable when the users start to come in and rapidly grow? So second way to think about partners is really buying a shortcut on time and helping you get to the market much quicker. So there are a lot of benefits. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of benefits to working with Amazon. Some of them to touch on is that's the largest global footprint. We have 25 regions around the world, with each region comprised of one or more availability center. These are individual data centers that have their own data lines, their own power grids, and each can take their own traffic and capacity from other failed AZs if that was ever to happen. So we really put a lot of effort into making sure that you're built on top of a really reliable and efficient infrastructure. Security. We have a number of compliance offerings if you're building in HIPAA space or PCI space or FedRAMP. If you go to our security page, you can learn about all the different accreditations we have to help you even run the most secure focused workload. The third is analytics. You know, it used to be that companies were competing on tech. The companies that had the greatest tech had the best advantage. But with cloud and specifically AWS, really all this tech has been democratized. And what this means is that your 1 or 2 person startup or even a 10 to 20 person startup have access to the exact same technology as the largest Fortune 500 company. And I want to give you an example. So we met with an insurance startup called Roots out of Ohio about 2 years ago. They're really small at the time, but you go down this back alley and they're in a small office there in the shadows of these large skyscrapers with insurance companies. And it was incredible to see what they were building because again, they are using the same tech that these large companies in the world are using. And so it just truly levels the playing field on the competitive side. So today companies are competing where companies are really competing is really on analytics. It's all of your apps, your mobile apps, your services, you're generating interesting data. So it matters of what you're doing with that to understand more about user behaviors. And we have a large number of services using ML to help you derive some really interesting insight to help build better products, engage your customers. And lastly, innovation. That goes to the slide that I talked about before. But we see a big increase in innovation for companies of all sizes who end up and switching and leveraging these 190 services from AWS. Next slide, please. Well, people ask, well, what are the drivers for migration to the cloud? Um, why people are actually moving for the first reason is agility. Giving your team access to these tools just gives them the ability to pivot and test new ideas. They're not dependent on other teams or multiple providers to get servers spun up, and it doesn't take hours. In a matter of minutes, you have access to all these services. It says data center consolidation. If you're doing data centers and your startups, let's have a conversation offline. I hope by 2021 we've all moved away from that. Another big need is security. I've touched on that. Digital transfer Digital transformation is interesting right now. There are a lot of companies that deal with paperwork that they're trying to find ways to digitize these business processes. Maybe it's phone calls or inbounds. Maybe it's thousands of submitted documents or claim forms or just handwritten pieces of paper. So we have tools like Amazon Comprehend that can go in, analyze these documents, pull out trends and people and topics and dates, and start giving you insights across vast amount of documents. So that's just one example of the many services that allow you to take one of our services, a simple API call, start pulling out real valuable information, and from this data that's locked in analog or hard to reach information. Of course, IoT, AI/ML are another big driver, and we're touching again on cost because that's a big area where we like to see where we can be helping startups. Next slide, please. So historically, and Jonathan touched on this a little bit, but historically we've seen thousands of migrations. Mission's gone through a large number of migrations, and I'm sure they have data that looks very similar to this. But the numbers that we have looked at for companies of all sizes have gone through migration to AWS have seen a 51% lower cost of operation. We have a lower cost of operation. We have smaller amount of teams needed to actually run this stuff. We see 95% unplanned downtime because again, basically off they're shifting the undifferentiated heavy lifting over to us. And we've gotten really good at running high scale, high traffic, high volume websites and applications. So let us run the infrastructure so you can go and focus on building your app. Because your developers now have access to these tools, we see a 62% productivity boost. People are able to have an idea in a matter of days, build out a prototype, and get it in the hands of customers and start getting feedback on these products. So we see big improvements, not just on deployment times, but also seeing people put out new features 3 times as many on average as customers and companies who have migrated. A program I do want to touch on before wrapping up is at AWS Activate. And this is a long-standing program for all of our startups, for all of our startup customers. All of the startups you saw on that slide in the beginning have all gone through Activate. And so if you're pre-funded, you have access to $1,000 in Amazon credit, which you can partner with Mission to help you find the most optimal way that you should be using these credits. We also have an offering of Activate if you have received funding from a VC or going through an accelerator, an incubator, you have access to potentially up to $100,000 in credits, business support, self-paced labs, and credits to really learn the ins and outs of services and many more benefits. Definitely look up Activate and be familiar with it. But definitely before you start building and using those credits, talk to Mission and find out how best you can apply those so that you're using them in a very efficient manner. So again, for the reasons I'm talking about today and many more, that's why you see companies like this building on Amazon today. We're excited to have you migrate over and start partnering with you to see what you and Mission end up building. So to summarize, benefits of working with partners. Next slide, please. So to summarize, benefits. Oh, I'm sorry, I did go one too far. With Mission is to allow to build quickly. You can basically work on building your app itself, or basically offload the burden of setting that architecture so it's well architected, and Mission will take care of that for you. Second, it's going to help make sure that it's cost optimized and you're not overspending, and that you have many ways to offset the cost of working with Mission. So it ends up saving you money. And the third is that they're going to ensure that you're building on a well architected, so that all those new developers and engineers that you're onboarding will see something familiar, and they'll understand how these components are pieced together. And they can start working and deploying new features and moving and not diving through the documentations to understand how these systems truly work. So for takeaways and next steps, you could first do absolutely nothing, in which case I thank you for your time. Second is that you could launch a free account and start playing with these services. But third, which is something that I truly do recommend, is that reach out to Mission, talk to them for an hour, show them what you're really working on, get feedback from them on ways to think about how your architecture should look, and potentially partner with them in future again. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Back over to you, Jonathan.
Right. Thank you so much, Rushabh, and try to do my best to navigate through those slides. Really appreciate it. Great context for the group here. And with that, I think I'm also going to hand it over to Scott now, because he's going to really run through a couple of essential steps that you can take as you're going ahead and acing that migration.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Rushabh. I guess before I kick it off, I just wanted to double click on something Rushabh mentioned, and that's like the best way for us to help is to just get us plugged in. You know, tell us your story, tell us what you're working on, and you know, no commitment required. But we're always happy to talk through use cases, give you some real world experience of what we've seen. You know, help level set and ground you as you're going on this journey. And you know, if there's a way that we can help you, we certainly will. And that's a little bit more about what I'll talk through now. So essentially, when looking at a potential cloud migration, and this goes for companies both large and small. It can be fairly difficult to get executive buy-in when there isn't really a catalyst event pushing you into it, right? So it's easy to justify a cloud migration when your data center is closing down, or your aging hardware is starting to fail, or insert various horror story here. But seeing the benefits of cloud computing, especially when it comes to financial ones, can be a bit more elusive and generally require some additional effort and probing. And so that's really, again, where a partner like Mission and obviously AWS as well can help out, is that we're here to help you work through your inventory, estimate costs and timelines, and validate your preparedness to support such an endeavor, and help you kind of set the stage for preparing your team for what's to come next. Next slide. So now that we kind of talked a little bit about why you should migrate, thanks Rushabh, and some of the hurdles to getting started, I wanted to talk a little bit about how. And so one of the best programs that AWS provides in terms of funding and structure is their Migration Acceleration Program, or MAP, you'll hear a lot of people say. And so the program provides a framework for helping you navigate through this migration journey that we've touched a lot on. MAP's broken down into 3 main phases, which include the assessment phase. It's a consultative workshop that uses AWS's cloud adoption framework to help you better understand your current cloud readiness state and identify any gaps to getting there. There's also like a total cost of ownership, cost optimization component as well. The mobilize phase, which is the primary, we'll call it the work phase, where we're building out AWS infrastructure, we can execute any necessary proofs of concept, and working to migrate a number of initial pilot workloads or applications, which will then kind of more easily set the stage for the final phase here, migrate and optimize, which is really just should end up being more of a migration factory style approach to executing the remainder of your migration, as well as looking at and implementing a number of optimization opportunities. So the MRA is an assessment framework built by AWS based on their years of experience with successfully migrating their customers to the platform. AWS has even built a tool to guide us through this assessment phase, and we're very pleased that they started allowing partners to do this type of work along with them. The MRA consists of a number of questions that AWS has developed, again, through their years of expertise managing customer migrations, with the goal of being able to help you identify any issues or potential problems before getting started. And so some of those things you should be thinking about are, what are your internal skill sets for prepping for this migration, managing the migration, and even operating in the cloud afterwards? How much financial planning have you done? What are licensing implications? How might this migration change the way you're charging your customers or even budgeting internally? What about disaster recovery, business continuity, security, patching, backups? All of those types of things need to be thought about and potentially revamped from how you're used to doing them. What improvements or optimizations do you want to achieve during and post migration? And then what are some of the main concerns or risks that you're kind of seeing in advance to having a successful migration? So the goal of this workshop, again, is to really get everybody together on the same page to talk through your objectives and generate any insights for informing your migration business case and plan. So this way we can be sure to make sure that we're getting you all the key pieces of information that you'll need to move forward. We've also partnered with CloudChomp for kind of total cost of ownership and financial and license modeling. And so there are 2 real main ways that we configure data ingestion into the platform. Number 1 is there's a VMware appliance that can ingest historical utilization data from vCenter. That's probably the easiest one and one that probably affects a great deal of you out there. And then there's an ability to use an SNMP agent to collect resource data from individual servers or VMs, and as well as perform any application discovery and dependency mapping in case you're not sure what's running on some of your systems anymore. So once things get set up, there's not a whole lot to do from there. The VMware integration will allow us to ingest any previously collected metrics, while again, the SNMP configuration will need to run for a few weeks' time so that we can collect some meaningful usage data. And again, this is because the right sizing algorithms looking at usage patterns over time, and we want to be able to use that to make some intelligent sizing recommendations so that as you're moving to AWS, you're looking at the costs of what you will end up with, not what it looks like to run what you're currently running in the cloud, which may be largely over provisioned. And so we're seeing that customers generally realize about a 41% average cost savings when migrating to AWS from their on-prem data centers. And all of this operational information combined with the output of that TCO analysis should really give you all that you need to make informed decisions about your business case and hopefully migration strategy. So moving into this mobilize phase, we'll validate the preliminary architecture design, work to automate deployments using infrastructure as code, and ideally work with you to do things like create VPCs and other networking components. Similarly goes for the account structure that you're going to be working with. You know, how do we build out a multi-account structure, meeting the AWS best practices that Rushabh was mentioning before. Deploying security and management tools, again, the backups, patching, monitoring, various operational processes. Those are all things that are probably going to have to be tailored to your new AWS environment. And then just building out those migration tool sets and automations and migrating those identified, we'll call them pilot workloads. Optimizing for cost is a big piece in this because we want to make sure that we're setting the stage for, again, right-sizing your infrastructure as we're going over, but also working through your ideal tagging and reporting structure so that as the environment grows, you have the ability to gain appropriate insights, make sure that we're tracking towards budget, and that as the environment is growing, you can kind of maintain governance and viewership over what's been deployed and where. And so also a big component's really training the teams on operating in the cloud. Again, if you're not familiar with AWS itself, it's somewhat straightforward, but by its self-service nature can sometimes be a little bit difficult. So there's always kind of a training knowledge component to make sure that your teams are up to speed on the latest and greatest. And then really finalizing the migration plan for that remaining migration work, everything that's sort of left. And again, the goal is to create this foundational automation and landing zone for migrating your applications and data and be able to get to a place where it's reliable, repeatable, and documented so that we'll be ready to kind of migrate the bulk of your remaining applications during the next phase. Next slide, thank you. So this final migrate phase uses the automation and lessons learned from Mobilize to deploy your remaining applications and workloads into AWS using we'll call it a phased migration approach. So incorporating a number of migration strategies defined in the TCO planning phase. So things like lift and shift, rebuild, migrate to AWS managed services, re-architect, modernize, and if you can see in the little chart here, this, you know, there's other R's too, including like retire and retain. So there might be a use case for keeping the thing that you're running where it is because of cost implications or latency or things like that. But 9 times out of 10, we'll see that a lot of things get retired on their way over because either AWS has a service to replace it with, or you're going to move to a SaaS model, or we're going to launch something from a marketplace, and you're just going to move some data and leave your old infrastructure behind. So we're trying to work through a migration factory style approach of your remaining workloads in a sort of migrate, validate, cut over fashion until completed. And so it's also an opportunity to execute on additional metrics driven cost and architectural optimization opportunities post migration. And then at the end of this phase, the expectations that you'll be fully migrated, or at least whatever subset that we were targeting, and operating in the cloud with full comfortability around ongoing operational management. And so the MAP program can also be repeated for additional workloads or data centers as necessary, and can really be done at whatever pace you'd like. AWS has a large timeline out there, so no pressure to jam things up there in the cloud. We want to make sure that we're working with you on getting things done right. And if you need some extra support in between, like Jonathan mentioned earlier, we can always help with one of our managed services.
Great, thank you, Scott. And yes, to build on that, as you do get through the process, you know, you'll recall that Rushabh talked about kind of optimizing in a continuous fashion so that you don't end up with these huge spikes where you're doing these one-time events to make sure you reduce your costs. There's a lot of realized savings that you can get by coming on board with Mission on one of our managed services. So the one that I'll highlight right now is called Mission Cloud One. And Cloud One provides you all of those optimization capabilities, governance to keep you on track, AWS support so that you get the best real-time kind of access to 24/7 teams to support you, and monitoring management incident response as well. So we'll help you manage the environment. We'll take a lot of the operational burden off your team. We'll instrument your environment with enterprise grade tools like New Relic, and then we'll be there to support you. That way, we'll help you keep the lights on, and then you can drive business value by building out new features and new capabilities for your workloads. So with that, before we close out, I wanted to mention that there is a special offer, and I'm glad I do because I see a common question here, which is sort of, what's my next step? How do I get in touch with Mission? And as Rushabh mentioned, you can sit down with us for an hour or two, and at no cost, a special offer to you is that you can get a free migration readiness assessment. So Scott talked through kind of what that looks like, a lot of questions to answer around kind of your business goals, things that you, capabilities you have, risks, continuity, all sorts of interesting questions. And with that, we'll walk through the financial, technological, and operational challenges you have, and we'll make sure you have a readiness assessment, and then we can move to the next phase and talk about a plan. So if you're interested in getting that free MRA, you can see here there is a URL that you can go visit, missioncloud.com/free MRA, and that'll help you get in touch with us, and we'll reach out and get one scheduled so that you can kind of start your journey to the cloud. And with that, I will also mention that you can, on our website, see a phone number that you can call, or you can email us as well. And we're delighted to hear from you and looking forward to helping you be very successful in acing your startup's migration to the cloud. So thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you all, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Scott and Rushabh, as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.